more love, more joy, everything.
It's inspired young people.
Inspiration comes from within you. When you clear out the garbage that's in your mind, you then create space for something better, more beautiful to come in.
Let's have life and have it more abundantly.
I say yes.
It's like taking a workshop. I get to be in my pajamas.
We have a very active imagination, which is why it's important to learn how to harness it and then point it in the direction you want to go.
I listen to your show every day.
It's time now for Living Your Inspired Life with Susan Burrell. Susan is no-nonsense, inspirational, motivational, and fun.
This is positive talk radio.
Practical wisdom for everyday life.
It's a gift you give yourself.
Now, here's Susan.
And welcome to Living Your Inspired Life. You're listening to News Talk 1590 KVTA, and we're here every week. Living Your Inspired Life is all about tuning in and tuning up, tuning into your inner awareness of who you are and developing your life or living your life from the inside out, in essence, and really developing a new perspective of living, a power perspective, if you will. So if you missed any of our shows, go to livingyourinspiredlife.org and tune in and tune up. So with that said, the Living Your Inspired Life team was talking about topics, because we like to choose topics for the show so that the show has a flow. And we were talking about health. And what do we want to talk about health about? Is that redundant? Maybe that is. Anyway, and what happened is during the course of this, what do we want to talk about? Health. A very wonderful, inspiring book came into our hands. It's called Living with the Bully of Crohn's Disease, and it's written by James Patterson. And Jim's in the studio with me, so welcome, Jim.
Well, welcome. Thank you. Thank you.
So the thing that caught our attention, our producers and myself, is your book is written from the place of having lived most of your life with a disease that is debilitating at the very least, and how you've managed it through the course of your life. And the thing that I loved was, hold on, I want to read a quote from James Patterson's book. In it, you said, "Seeing Crohn's disease as my life's curse causes me to fixate on the ailment as an integral defining part of myself. This is like viewing a rose bush and putting all my attention on the thorns versus the roses." And I got to tell you, I read that and I went, yep, because this is what we talk about on Living Your Inspired Life. It's where your attention goes, the energy flows. So if you're going to focus on the disease, then you get more of that, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you're absolutely correct. One of the biggest challenges with dealing with Crohn's or any lifelong ailment was it's so obvious. Having a disease is constantly calling its attention to you. Hey, here I am, here I am. And so what is our options? And, it does take a lot of effort. But, my experience was I had to find a way to put my attention on something else.
On something else.
And that was really the key and really the start of the process of how I'm going to go about trying to heal myself.
Okay, so for our listeners who don't know what Crohn's disease is, could you just give us a brief description?
Just as a brief description, it's a inflammatory disease of what I call the GI system. It's predominantly everything from the mouth through the entire GI tract, et cetera. And we don't know what really causes it. There seem to be some genetic components, but we're not really sure. It tends to be pretty debilitating. It tends to impact people that are generally in their teens to 20s. They're immortal and then they're not.
Yeah.
Quite devastating in that process. And we don't have a cure for it. It's a lifelong ailment. It waxes and wanes like arthritis and other diseases, where it's active and it's inactive. And there's constant research ongoing to try to find a cure, but there's no cure at this point.
Right. And there's a website that people can do some more research about this, and it's called?
It's the ccfa.org, Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America.org. They are a nonprofit organization committed to finding a cure, and they do a lot of fundraising, runs and walks, et cetera, to try to find cures for Crohn's disease, as well as ulcerative colitis, both.
Oh, my gosh. Okay. So going back to Crohn's, and it affects the GI system. That makes it very hard to assimilate your food and get any kind of nutritional value out of anything.
Absolutely. One of the, nutrition, malnourishment is a real significant issue with Crohn's
Yeah.
disease. Also, anemia is a real problem with Crohn's disease. People tend to become very iron deficient in the process. And of course, in one's lifetime, about 70% of the patients will end up having to have a surgery.
Right.
And so when you start losing parts of your intestinal tract, the net effect is that you're going to, you're going to also be more malnourished as well.
Right. So explain to me why you call the book Living with the Bully of Crohn's Disease.
Because it behaves like a bully.
Okay,
it was
let's
just such a
describe
classic statement. And so, what does a bully behave like? It's obnoxious. It comes and goes as it pleases. It tends to bug you at the wrong times. It has no respect. And that's exactly how Crohn's behave.
It pushes your nth nerve.
Absolutely. One day you can feel great. The next day you feel bad. One moment you can feel great. The next moment you can feel bad. It doesn't care if you're having a wedding, if you're going to a great dinner, you're going to a great event. It just happens.
Right.
And it's a bully.
Right. So in the process of your exploration, I want to put it that way,
Okay.
an experience of this disease in your life, you said it started when you were a teenager.
13.
13. Holy... You didn't even have an opportunity to have a teenage life, it sounds like.
Yeah. And the bigger issue for me is that I didn't find out until 47 years later that's what was my problem.
Oh, my goodness. Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Now, I have to share with you, I am a type 1 diabetic, and I've been that way for 20 years. And it was probably a 10-year escapade to find out that until I was finally diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, because people couldn't put their finger on what was wrong with me. So I can relate to going a long time undiagnosed and wondering what the heck is going on.
Absolutely. And I think that's the bigger issue. In Crohn's is particularly because it can be other things like irritable bowel syndrome. It can be just general, it could be celiac disease.
Right.
It could be other things. So it's frequently missed and sort of, put off to the side. And so it's not unusual to have 5 to 8 years. I was just a little more unfortunate that it took decades before they
Right.
were able to figure it out.
And so then what happened once the diagnosis was uncovered finally?
Well, after 40-something years and it was finally uncovered, what happened was, the disease continues. At least now we had a name for it. And, one of the things about having an ailment that one's not sure about is there's sort of a psychological component that goes along with that, like, what's wrong with me?
Right.
I don't feel right. Nobody believes me. It's very depressing, I think, for a lot of patients, and including myself, is that, everybody says, we can't find anything wrong or you have issues there. For a number of years, they thought it was just psychological.
Oh, I got to tell you, I went to a doctor. I said, there's something really wrong with me. He was, forgive me, he was a man in his mid-70s, and I was 20-something, and he looked at me and said, it's all in your head, and gave me a pill that I found out later continued to multiply the problems that led to my diagnosis of diabetes.
Wow.
So there, it's not all in our head. Well, it can be all in our heads, but really.
Absolutely. And I think, for most people, I think that is one of the establishing credibility, and it's not only from this standpoint, and I think it's all well given, you have the doctors, do they believe us or not? But then you also have family and friends, which are well intended, but they're kind of at you, and they say to you, well, just eat the right food, or just do this, and we're going to get better, or just stop being stressed out, or whatever. And it's well-meaning. I think a lot of times, people, it's a natural tendency to be upset because they're not living the ailment. But at the same token, I don't think it's intentional. But at the same token, it's kind of like, it doesn't help. The
Right.
fact it's not a stress issue. It's an ailment.
Right. And here, so you just described the flipping of the coin, and then you flip it again, and then you flip it again. And now, okay, today it's this, and maybe eating right helps. What I notice, and I'm a counselor as well. So what I notice is, in my experience, the people that love us the most want to fix us so that we're no longer in pain. And there's always that, well, have you thought of this? And have you tried that? And pretty soon there comes a place where at least for me, where I think I've done everything. I have done everything, and this still is going on.
Absolutely. In fact, it's interesting. They have a lot of boards, on the internet now. Then they have them that are committed to this particular ailment, and that's probably the number one issue that people complain about is, my family. Oh, they don't, just do this or just do this, and we'll fix it for you. And and that becomes in itself, with somebody with a chronic ailment, something that we have to learn to better manage, because, our option is to be upset about that all the time. And we have to realize that it's their interest. They're doing it because they're interested in us.
Right.
So we have to learn another alternative to being upset about that. We have to say, you know what? They really care about us. They're wrong, but they really care about us.
Yeah, their best intentions.
Exactly.
So I want to talk about that, managing the upset in just a minute, but let's talk about, you did do support groups early on. Now, how was that for you? For people that are struggling with this, how was that for you? Because I did some, and I have my opinion.
Now, be more specific as far as support groups.
You went to groups where you were talking about the disease and how to deal with it?
Right. I did, and absolutely. And, two issues. One of them is, in most of the groups I would go to, the support group would be all about, let me tell you about my misery.
Yeah.
And this would go on. In fact, I don't mean to be derogatory, but, I would call them sometimes like misery support groups.
Yep.
It would be discussions about how bad I feel. And by the way, it was legitimate. People were really struggling with the process. But I found by going to these meetings, I felt worse when I left because there wasn't solutions. It was all about, I feel really bad. I'm really hurting. That was very legitimate. But I was saying, well, what can we do about this? How can we move forward in our lives? How can we, experience more joy, happiness, peace, better health, etc.? And it's really not, in all fairness, I don't think they're really set up, or it's something most people don't investigate. They're hopeful for a pill, a shot, an injection, as opposed to a psychological, maybe, transformation that maybe will help them better deal with a chronic ailment that isn't going to go away.
So often in support groups, and I lead several of them, and it is the place where people want to have a safe space to come and talk about their misery. It becomes a dumping ground. But the place when when I lead support groups, what I encourage those people to do, which sounds like what you're doing and asking the questions, is to really talk about what's going on in your life with the intention to move through it, with the intention to say, okay, now I can let that part go enough to really see, change my perspective, transform the way I see things, as opposed to just going, here's my garbage, and then next week I come back and here's my garbage and here's my garbage. There's no, it becomes a rut that people are in.
Absolutely. And, I'm going to date myself a little bit
go
here.
ahead.
I'm going to date myself a little bit. But you may remember the Bob Newhart show.
Oh, yeah.
From years ago.
Oh,
If
yeah.
you notice, nobody ever got better.
No, they didn't.
Everybody was just lousy. I mean, and I called it a great example. He would come in, I'm a problem here, and a problem here, and a problem here. Nobody ever got any better. And so, in the same idea, and by the way, let me be really clear. I think support groups are great.
Yes, they are.
I'm a total fan, but it's important that we keep focused, at least from my personal experience, on what can I take away. First of all, to get some acknowledgement that other people can say, oh, yes, he's suffering and he's having challenges. I think that's great. But what can I do now to feel better? How can I improve myself? This isn't going to go away, so how can I better manage the process? And that's really was somewhat the idea behind the book as well, is I needed to find other tools outside of the pills and the potions part that I had already dealt with to move forward.
Right. So let's talk about that now, because you are continuing to see doctors, and
Absolutely.
And there's medication, and there's medical processes that you're continue to be involved in. But your self-exploration has led you into this comprehension and practice of the mind, body, and spirit component of health, which at Living Your Inspired Life, that's what we're all about. Everything's interconnected. You can't have health without having connection to the wisdom within you, or that how your mind is making a guinea pig out of you. So how did you begin to explore all that?
Well, I guess I really think about it. It started, when I didn't know what I had. It started when I was a teenager, because I just knew that there was something wrong. And I would go to a doctor and they'd say there was nothing wrong. And then I went into my 20s and I would go to the doctor and they said, you're probably depressed, or you're probably too hyper. You need to calm down. You need to take some medication for calming, and you need to get more rest and whatever else. And it didn't. And by the way, I tried it and it didn't help. I still felt ill. And so there came a point where, well, and let me break into it. So number one is I started early on looking for alternatives because I didn't feel any better. But then even when I got the diagnosis decades later, I also continued looking at other alternatives as well. And again, along those lines was I figured, well, I can't do anything about the physical ailment. It exists. Now, let me stop a minute. I can take the best medications. I can get the best medical help available, and that is useful. But it's still present. And therefore, I need to look at other ways to enhance myself. And for me, the best opportunity for healing was dealing with my mental and emotional and spiritual self.
Okay, so let's go back to the idea of healing. Because lots of people hear that word and think that means, like touch the hem of the garment and then you're done with the disease, right? And that's not necessarily what healing means. And I'm speaking from having diabetes for 20 years, that the healing is, for me, happens more in my mind, in my emotions, as opposed to my physical. I mean, certainly my blood sugars are better when I'm working with my mental and emotional and spiritual components.
And I guess from my side, I completely agree. The healing component was, first of all these years of having something that I didn't understand, what my normal reaction when something bothers me, and I guess what bother a lot of other people, would be, my reaction is what I call rather adolescence, but how I learned as a child, it would be anger, fear, and guilt.
Yep, I'm raising my hand and count,
those,
and I got those.
Those are my big three. And some people would throw in sadness, which isn't
yeah.
my major one, but those are my big three. So, I learned that in response to this disease, but also in response to challenges in life in general, maybe some difficulties at work, difficulties in a relationship, difficulties with my family members, my response in terms of not enjoying and having something go in a direction I wasn't happy with would be anger, fear, and guilt. So the first thing I sort of realized that I need to find a better way to manage uncomfortable things in my life besides anger, fear, and guilt, because anger, fear, and guilt do nothing but exacerbate the symptoms of Crohn's disease, period.
I got to tell everybody out there, they do nothing but exasperate the symptoms of every single ailment you may find that you have. Bursitis, arthritis, diabetes, blah, blah, blah. The anger, the guilt, the fear. Just amplifies it.
Absolutely. And while we don't know, but there is a certain amount of anecdotal evidence about the disease itself that stress exacerbates the disease. It may even be a semi-trigger to create another flare. And generally stresses is when we respond with anger, fear, and guilt because things aren't going in the direction we have. So one of the biggest things, and I realized, and I didn't do this through any counseling, but I realized that my responses to difficulty in life were something I pretty much developed when I was 6 or 7 years old, and I never changed it.
Oh, interesting.
It's something that because when I was young, when I didn't like something, I got angry about it, and I was fearful about it, or I felt guilty about something, and I didn't realize that. And then here I was in my 20s, still responding the same way. It doesn't mean now I learned that it's inappropriate to burst out in anger in a business meeting, but at the same token, internally, which is where a lot of the discomfort is anyway, that's how I was really feeling. So again, and this took me years, so decades into this process, I realized that one of the first places to start is there other ways that I can respond besides anger, fear, and guilt. And I needed to start doing some personal work to sort of work through that process and say, you know what? And a lot of it is what I call sort of self-analysis, self-evaluation, working along those lines. And that was a big part of what I did.
Right. So there's something I've been hearing while you were talking that I just want to tease out of this, because you said it's the anger, it's the fear, it's the guilt, because things don't work out the way we want it.
Exactly.
And what I'm hearing with that is, because this is my thing, it's because I couldn't control the outcome. It doesn't look the way I wanted it to, which means I really wanted it to be perfect. All of those are all human components that I think 90% plus of the population has. And those are all survival mechanisms of, if I don't feel safe, I want to control it. If I don't feel safe, I want to make sure it's perfect. That way nobody can come and criticize me or abandon me or reject me because of all that. So the emotions of anger, fear, and guilt are often because we have these other behavioral things that we may not even be aware of until we do what you did, Jim, the evaluation.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, you can make an argument, and it's legitimate, that there is a value in all those components under the right circumstances. However, to have it chronic and have it be our major response, and of course we have a bully, in this case, that we're living with. If you live with a bully, how would you feel? Would you be angry some of the
I'd
time?
want to move, man.
Exactly. And so, and it goes, the bully could also be the bully of diabetes.
Oh, yeah.
It could be the bully of arthritis. It could be the bully of bursitis. It could be the bully of, all other kinds of disease. And even the bully of a bad relationship, a bad situation at work. It can be all this. And it's just that chronic response of that anger, fear, and guilt over time, at least, and I've really found this to be true for myself, exacerbates what I have. So one of the ways that I can affect a healing or feel better, in the truest sense of the word, is by learning to better ways to manage that. And so for me, it allowed me, what my process was, and I talk about this in the book, is, going back and sort of, getting more in touch with what that anger component and fearful and guilty component was, and having an adult conversation, because I looked at those components within me as rather immature elements. They were rather, something I developed as a very youthful time in my life. And I realized that I have an adult now, which is the grown-up adult. And now I can speak to that component of me because it's still there and it's still present. And I say, maybe there's a better way we can manage this component. Maybe instead of just being angry, we can look at it in a different perspective. We can work it through. We can maybe see it from the side of the other person. We put a little bit more of our compassion and maturity in the process. And
so as you're talking right now, so do you do an inner dialogue with your inner child?
It is an inner dialogue. And it is something, when I first started, to be honest, a lot of this is sort of self-developed, to be candid with you. But for me, that's what I came to the conclusion of. It's a component of myself that responds in a certain way. I called it an immature element. You could call it an inner child. I'm not a psychologist.
Right.
I don't know how to define these things. But basically I said I need to, communicate here, because otherwise it will continue to lash out, like a little kid in a store. Well, I want this, blah, blah, blah. I needed to come to grips, have a conversation, work it through. So I guess it would almost be self-cognitive therapy would be a good example of what I've been doing.
Right. So for our listeners, how did that begin? I mean, did you like when you had an upset, when you had a flare, did you then turn to the kid and say, "Listen, you're immature, go sit in the corner"?
No. My experience has always been that is the absolute worst thing you can do to that part of us.
Really?
In my opinion, that part of us, responds best to compassion, to attention, and also support, because I feel that part of me is always done its best. It did the best that it could.
Oh my God, where were you? You were in my head yesterday morning when I was telling myself I'm doing the best I can.
Okay. And so that's my experience, because I really believe that part of all of us, is doing its best. But now I'm going to bring in more mature elements, my adult self, to kind of say, hey, I'm going to take on some of that responsibility that this other part of me has done. And frankly, I just never talked to it. It's kind of like, and I don't want to make it sound like something that I sit down every day, but it's been my experience, and I guess I'm going to say that it's been my experience that these three emotions really create a lot of problems in my life. I need to bring them under control. The best way to do that is by having a very compassionate, understanding conversation on a regular basis. And over time, I take on more of that responsibility and allow that what I call immature childlike element to do what it does best, and that's be creative, be spontaneous, be enthusiastic, because those are childlike energies as well, as opposed to anger, fear, and guilt.
Well, so just to tease that part out a little bit more,
sure.
If the immature element is creative, then what better way to create than create a disease that has to get our attention because we've been ignoring it, thinking that we're adults now and we're doing the right thing.
It's an interesting point, and we could have probably a great discussion about why does disease come into our lives anyway, and is there some value it's sort of knocking on our door, et cetera. I've thought about those thoughts as well.
I notice in my personal life, like I'm been under a tremendous amount of stress. I share this openly with everybody. And so my personal experience is I have gone through series, tons of times where I'm breaking out into hives. And so I have to sit down with myself and talk to that immature component, that inner child, and go, whoa, what is it that you think I'm not paying attention to? Just let me know. And when I begin to do that, the hives calm down, they go away, because then that part of me is being seen and heard. It's like a 2-year-old throwing a temper tantrum. When people turn to the kid and go, what's wrong with you? Be quiet. It's really the kid is saying, hey, I need some attention.
Absolutely. And at the same token, as we would with being a good parent, in this case, we're being a good parent to ourselves.
Yeah, which is
important. As opposed to being a good parent. One of the other issues about being a good parent is we want to make sure that we also recognize who's the parent. Because, if we were to say, I'm getting on, and we're not in a position where we can always, yes, and there's a point that says, we're just not going to go in this direction. It becomes a little bit more, it's sort of like I say, the executive function of our mind that steps in and says, we're going to work this through. I'm going to express, my love and attention and compassion and understanding for this part of me. But at some point, I need to say, what? We're just not going to allow this to happen. We're going to have to move this in another direction. And yet, as any child would, or I'm not a child anymore, but I could understand this, that I would probably accept that if I understood it was being done in a manner that was really consistent with my own welfare.
Right.
And that's what's important.
Right. That's brilliant. So, James, in the book, you have different chapters that are on fear, that are on forgiveness, gratitude, and the one that, of course, caught my attention is the distorted beliefs, which is really what we're talking about right now. So let's deal with the distorted beliefs first. You know what? First of all, what we're going to do is we're going to take a short break, and then we're going to come back and we'll go through those different components of your book, James Patterson, Living with the Bully of Crohn's Disease. This is Living Your Inspired Life, and we're going to be right back.
Hi, this is Susan Burrell from Living Your Inspired Life. I always find it easier and more fun to expand my life by being connected to open-hearted, like-minded people committed to being on the same path I am. If you feel the same way, I suggest you visit a Center for Spiritual Living. There are wonderful communities in Ventura, Ojai, Santa Barbara, Oxnard, Pleasant Valley, Camarillo, and Westlake Village. You'll find terrific people, great information, and more tools to help you live the life you were born to live. So go to csl.org to find a center near you. That's csl.org for a center near you.
And welcome back to Living Your Inspired Life. And again, if you've missed anything, go to livingyourinspiredlife.org and get caught up. And the other thing you can do when you get onto the website is you can make a donation. If you like hearing what we talk about every week and you want to make sure that we are sustainable, I could sure use some sustainability. So there's a donation page, and we have a PayPal account, and you can give one time or you can give monthly, which I am deeply grateful for whatever it is that you could give to us. And that's on livingyourinspiredlife.org. So back to the conversation. Living with the Bully of Crohn's Disease. James Patterson's in the room with me, and we've been talking about the disease and the cognitive therapeutic aspect that you, Jim, have developed. So I just want to, for our listeners, I want to hear, first of all, before we delve into the rest of the book, how do you talk to that immature component of yourself? So are you dialoguing, like talking out loud, or are you writing it down, or what do you do?
No, it's an internal dialogue. I would describe it as something, a quiet moment during the day, probably something every day. It's kind of, I look at it as, something that I try to make a point of each day, take at least 10, 15 minutes to sit down and, sort of itself out, how was the day? How did things go? How did I respond? Is there anything I'm missing here? Sort of asking myself, is there something that I'm not queued up on? Is there a part of me that's not, that's asking for some help or some assistance in the process? So it's a dialogue. And frankly, at the beginning, I didn't get many answers.
Yeah.
But over time, I do. And so it becomes a very active dialogue. Now, am I sitting there in the room if my wife walks in and she's saying, "Who are you talking to?" No, it's just like we do. We
Internal.
talk to ourselves on a regular basis. If we're out golfing, I'm going to hit the ball straight. If we're out there, I'm going to say this to my. We're always practicing how we're going to dialogue. In the same way, but to me, the key to this dialogue is regularity. It's like if you want to establish a relationship with a person, you need to be consistent. If you want to establish a relationship with yourself, you can't do it just when you're feeling good or just when you're feeling bad or just when you feel like it. You need to do it on a regular basis.
I love that. That's a great analogy.
Yeah. And so for me, it's a regular process. I commit a little bit of time every day and a little bit of discussion. And it really starts more along those lines of how was my day? How did it go? Something I'm missing here? Maybe could I have done this better? And then I also will check in, am I overly angry about something, overly this? Is there another way to perceive it? And I will work through that process. It becomes a daily drill for me. And that's the key, no matter how I feel, just as we would in any kind of relationship. It doesn't matter, maybe it matters how we feel, but the important thing is consistency.
Right.
We do it regularly.
And you take maybe 10 to 15 minutes.
10 to 15 minutes. And, some
That's
people...
doable for people, I think.
Absolutely. And, some people, and frankly, for years, I tried, different forms of meditation in lieu of that. And occasionally I will as well. But in this case, and I found the meditations might be relaxing and enjoyable, but I still had the issues to deal with. So I now have a more pragmatic dialogue going on that seems to help. And that doesn't preclude that if I want to do meditation or something else that I have that option as well.
Right.
But, this is really a matter of talking to myself, working on myself. And again, it's not unlike anybody does if they're planning, et cetera. Although in this case, it's asking questions, checking in. And at the beginning, frankly, I didn't get much response, but I get it on a regular basis now.
Right, because you're attuned and tuned in to yourself. And I just want to share for our listeners, there's also journaling, I've found, is another great way to have that inner dialogue. Because if I'm not writing it down, then I kind of will go off into the ethers of whatever the question was and not really pay attention. So for me, journaling helps me to, ask the question, how was my day? And then write it down. It also helps me get that information out of my head so it's not festering. And so that if there was an anger issue or an upset of some kind, I can see it a little more clearly. And for some people, I think that really works as well. The inner dialogue, and it can be nonverbal, or you can write it down. Yeah. So let's go. Okay, now let's delve into the book, Living with the Bully of Crohn's Disease. And you've got several chapters on gratitude, forgiveness, joy, distorted belief systems. So let's start with the distorted belief systems.
Sure. And what I observed is normally when I have a strong angry response or a strong fearful response or a strong guilty response, and it's really significant, I usually will tie that in and realize I'm hitting on a significant belief, frequently a distorted belief. And that belief, let's say I might be working on something and I'm really frustrated about it. That distorted belief, I might check in, it might be, I need to do this perfectly.
Oh boy, I got that.
Okay, and that is the belief that I'm violating because I am not doing it perfectly.
I love the words you use. You're violating that belief by not doing it perfectly.
And so what requires, and so what I have observed is when I have strong emotional responses, again, that's the key. If they're very powerful, it generally means I've hit on a particular belief. Now, I can then say, well, what is that belief? And in this case, let's say it's a belief of perfectionism. So the belief might be, I need to do this perfectly, or I must always be perfect. And then obviously that's a distorted belief because it's unrealistic. It'll create nothing but misery in one's life. Nobody's ever going to heal with that type of belief. So I need to go through and change it. And I say, well, you know what? Trying to do my best is always important, but maybe instead of I need to be perfect at all times, is I will attempt to improve myself on a regular basis, and I will do all I can to develop new skills in order to do so. That would be an alternative to I need to be perfect all the time. And so that's what I talk about. And I list a number of beliefs, in the book, and I talk about here's the belief, which again elicits a strong response, and then I need to change this and work on that as well. Now, do they go away in one sitting? No. A belief or a strong emphasis on being a perfectionist does not go away in a single sitting.
I gotta say, Jim, I'm not even sure it goes away in a single lifetime. Do you know? It's almost like it's the thing you have to keep going back to and addressing. Yeah, it's the immature part of yourself. You have to say, no, we're not going to be perfect today. That's okay.
So, and I think what I found is that coming up with a suitable alternative is even better, because it's not just saying, okay, I can't be perfect, but it's saying, I will do the best I can, and this is the part, I will continue to try to develop new skills. So I'm actually going to be proactive about it instead of just saying, I'm not going to do that. I think the mind, at least my mind, responds a lot better is if I come up with alternatives that it can buy into. Now, what I've observed is those strong beliefs will continue to come back, but over time, and by the way, I will say about all these things, it's not a quick fix. It's not a single event, I've got this done, I'm done. Keeping in mind that I've been behaving this way for decades. I'm not 22 anymore.
Right.
And therefore, if I've been behaving this way for decades, how can I expect for me to get rid of it all in a couple of weeks? So what I talk about here are things that I've worked on for years. And I would say with confidence that it has made a difference. I have, and I call it a healing in terms of, as I have reduced my anger, fear, and guilt, I have reduced things that exacerbate Crohn's, and not only Crohn's, but other parts of my life. It improves my relationships and everything else, and therefore, I live a better life.
Right. So uncovering the distorted beliefs, and then you deal with it with an affirmation, a positive approach, and a proactive approach, which is, here's the positive side of this, and then I'm going to learn something more about it.
Exactly. I think, you have to walk away with a better wording than I need to be a perfectionist, or I need to be, and even it can be, I need to be the perfect mother.
Oh, God,
I need to be
everything.
the perfect spouse. I can't fail in anything I do, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these issues have to be dealt with. And in the book, I talk specifically about beliefs associated with Crohn's, but they apply, and we're talking in a broader perspective.
They're pretty universal.
They're pretty universal. But the key issue, exactly, what I've personally found is when something bothers me a lot again, I need to sit down and figure out what that is, and then come up with a suitable alternative, and then work at it.
Okay, so let's talk about the practice of forgiveness and gratitude and how that brings you into joy.
Sure. And I'll use those as separate qualities. There's several parts here. My first exercise was identifying the anger, fear, and guilt, and working through the distorted beliefs. After that, I felt that I'd sort of cleaned house on a lot of my issues, but then I thought, what else would create a lot of, what other ways can I work on healing? And I thought about the things in my life that are truly healing experiences, and they are when I experience gratitude and forgiveness and joy. And so I said, well, can I do something with that? And I figured, well, maybe I can actually enhance those in my lives. I can work to build qualities in my life. So my next effort in all three of those cases was, I'm going to spend regular time on a daily basis and work to build those three qualities in my life, because by themselves, they're healing. I mean, think about it. When you feel grateful, truly grateful, I mean, how do you feel? I mean, and what is your experience? It's a healing energy by itself.
I feel lighter when I feel grateful.
Absolutely. Joy.
Of course, I cry a lot when I feel grateful too, which is kind of...
Yeah, but joy, the same way.
Right.
And even true forgiveness. You're relinquishing your angst towards some event, some person, or whatever else. It's a very healing experience. So for me, I found that I needed to add those into the process. And I guess one of the things that I thought about for some time is, can I actually do that? Or am I just who I am? I remember my grandparents, when I was growing up, they would always say, well, I'm just this way.
Yep.
That's all that I'm going to be. I'm just this way. You're going to have to live with it, et cetera, et cetera. But the reality of it is, we can change who we are. Now, not in a moment, not in one sitting, maybe not even 6 months, not in a year, but over time we can. And a lot of people, again, why does it take so long? Because we have decades of experience of living in a certain way. But the reality was that in order for me to heal, I needed to bring in what I call these were healing energies. The fact I was reducing my anger, fear, and guilt, I was just reducing non-healing energies. But in this case, I'm actually building energies into myself. And that was by forgiveness, joy, and gratitude. And I talk a lot about those. One of the things that I'm sure you've experienced in the case of joy is different than happiness.
Yes.
Happiness is a response to a life event. Joy is an energy that just permeates all of life.
Right.
Very, very different.
Right, it is. And so specifically in bringing those qualities into your life more intentionally, how did it affect the disease?
It absolutely enhanced it, again, because on two levels, because we know
You mean enhanced it in a good way?
It enhanced it in a good way, but we know that Crohn's responds to stress and negativity and whatever else. So by bringing in those healing energies, I absolutely felt better. And not only in the case of Crohn's, but my entire life. To feel a sense of, I remember it's been a number of years ago, but I made a point, and the first one I worked on was gratitude. And I was going through a tough time, and I said, I have nothing to be grateful for. But I says, this has got to be nonsense. I mean, and so first of all, it was defining what gratitude was, and the steps on all these is what is gratitude, and I talk about that, and then I need to observe it in life and to see that it's always going on. There's always graciousness going on in life. And then I need to be proactive about working with it. The same thing with forgiveness and the same thing with joy. What is it? Where do I see it? And I need to now work with it each particular day. So I make a point of hitting on all of those every single day in my process. And over time, they become more part of who I am. And they're healing. They create less angst and issues with Crohn's as well as the rest of my life.
So when you say you're working with these components and you become proactive to bring them into your life, so give us an example of how you did. I mean, you just did with the gratitude of looking for where you see everything that's gracious and knowing that it's there all the time. But give us an example for the forgiveness one.
Well, I guess first of all, in forgiveness, and this could be a little bit dicey, but from my perspective of how I experience forgiveness, I realized that forgiveness was something I had to do on my own.
Yeah.
Which means I always had this idea forgiveness would be something where somebody would do something that would allow me to forgive them, and that never worked. Which means
wait, say that again. Somebody, because I think I have the same thing going on. Somebody would do something that would allow you to forgive them.
Exactly.
Oh, how nice of them, Jim.
Yeah. Well, and the idea in mind is that with forgiveness, that I always assumed, and again, this is my own thinking, that I was going to forgive them because they were going to do something to redeem themselves in my own eyes. That never worked out because it never happened. And so I realized forgiveness is something I do for myself, number one. Number two is I realize that forgiveness, in the most fundamental sense of things, is my ability to give up my angst towards people or events in my life. Give up my angst of Crohn's. Probably one of the biggest issues for me was forgiving the Crohn's in my life. And maybe for you, forgiving the diabetes in your life.
I'm telling you, I think this is also probably true for most people that have chronic illnesses, is there's a place where it's very easy to feel like a victim, that you're at the effect of the disease, that you're, for me, feeling that I'm broken, and so there's been times in my life where I'm embarrassed to tell people that I have to, check my blood, or I can't go work out because it's way too high, my blood sugar's high, or, to bring those, what do I want to say, those parts of myself to the forefront and share them with people of where I'm not perfect or I'm not normal like everybody else. It's definite. It's a ongoing roller coaster.
Absolutely. And one of the things you said I think is real interesting, and I don't know if everybody can relate to it, but having a chronic ailment can actually be very embarrassing and humiliating.
Yeah.
And most people don't realize that. But it can be. It's like, I can't do these things. And a lot of people think, well, you don't really want to do them anyway. No, I mean, there's been many times when I wish I could have gone somewhere, but I had to have a surgery, or I could have done this, but I couldn't because I was really ill. And there was nothing fun about that process, but it was humiliating. And so one of the comments is that ailment or whatever else, I'll go back to it again, is one of the, and what I've also observed, I'm switching gears here, looking at the boards, one of the biggest things that I hear people rant about is how angry they are towards their disease.
Yeah, which just is the vicious cycle, right?
Exactly. And it's not only the anger, basically it's also the lack of forgiveness as well in there. So their ability to say, and the disease didn't get them. It didn't come after them. It is what it is. And if we look in life, we all have our issues. It might be an ailment. It could be something with our chronic issues, with work issues. It could be relationship problems. We all have something we have to work through. And we need to understand that. So we're not being singled out to say, this is your curse in life and you deserve it and whatever else. I think we need to work through that. But importantly, our ability to forgive is when we make the decision that says, I'm not going to put my angst on that anymore.
Right.
And that's a powerful thing to do and a difficult thing for most people to do, to say, you know what, I'm going to give up retribution and have other people, apologize to me or whatever else, or the disease or whatever else. It's a very difficult thing to do. But it is so healing, in my opinion, more so than gratitude and even joy. Is forgiveness. For me, was the most healing of the energies to work.
So that's why in your book that forgiveness component comes first.
I actually, in the book they're all there, but forgiveness,
all
I wrote a lot more about forgiveness because it was also the most difficult. When I think about gratitude, it's easy peasy because everybody loves gratitude and everybody loves joy. But you want to talk about forgiveness, it's like, ooh, God, I have to talk about forgiveness. That's disgusting. And the reality of it is, it's one of the more powerful energies as well to work through.
I want to go back to the humiliation, embarrassment part too, because this may help people. Because what I'm finding in my current experience of things is that the embarrassment also precludes me from asking for help. In the times when I most often need the most help, it's, well, if I just manage everything, I can manage it on my own. I'll do all my inner work. I'll make sure I'm testing my blah, blah, blah. But there are just times where I need help, and what I'm noticing is it's very, very challenging for me to ask for help. It goes back to the perfectionism thing. But also, I think because there's this embarrassment of, wow, if I could just do it on my own, I would,
And for me, as you talk about that, I also think about that wounded part of me, that young childlike part of me that's feeling wounded. And how can I ask for help when I'm so insignificant?
Right.
I'm not worth anything. It's a worthiness issue as well.
Right.
At least that's been my experience. And therefore, that also comes back to that self-dialogue. What's going on today? I'm feeling really worthless. I'm feeling I'm not worth of anything. How can I possibly ask for help would be a great example of that. And the reality of this, for us to heal, for me, I have to start talking, you are worth it. Look at all the good things. Look at what you've accomplished in life. And, I have to kind of go through and say, you've done this, and sort of, self-dialogue with myself to talk about, hey, you have a lot to contribute in life. You should be proud of what you've done. This is something you have to do for yourself. You can't always have a colleague or a friend or a counselor doing it for you. You have to do this for yourself.
I find in my experience, and I've done a lot of work with people, with myself, for people, for myself. And what I find is if somebody reflects all those things to me, I go, yeah, but it bounces right off. It's when I sit down with myself and I get this image of a couch, and I sit down with my arm around the immature component or the inner child and say, okay, it's okay. And for whatever those things are that are going on, for whatever reason, I'm embarrassed or I need to forgive you, me, that kind of stuff. So then how do we get to joy from this?
Well, and again, for me, I worked on all three together. I talked about anger, fear, and guilt, but then on the other ones, which was joy, gratitude, and forgiveness, I worked on all those together. And so over a number of years, frankly, I started with gratitude. And then I realized, and I probably went in that order, I did forgiveness because I realized one of my biggest issues was forgiving myself for having a lifelong ailment. And then,
I'm raising my hand, got the same thing.
And then the last point, I said, what else is a great healing energy? And it's joy. And I remember, it's an image that I write about in the book, I remember being at a theater and there was this woman truly hunched over with arthritis. She was, just shuffling along, basically. But I looked at her and I spoke to her for a moment and she was so full of joy. Even in spite of a crippling ailment, there was joy there, and it was obvious. And so I said, this is more than the event. This is an energy within herself. I need to work on that. So I added in joy as well. And the same idea, she would be an example of, there's an example of joy and how it expressed itself. And then I need to go out and see on a daily basis, even on the day when, family's having challenges, work isn't going well, whatever else, I need to find some joy. I need to see examples of joy with the roses, or look at the graciousness that's going on here, or look at people enjoying themselves there. I need to have my mind constantly recognize the presence in the life, and then also express it, in the same way I can proactively express an energy like joy even when I don't feel well. It's independent of that. It's independent of that.
I love that you've expressed that. I mean, that you've explained that, because in my experience, I see that that's so. It is so. And I also notice that on the days when I don't got so much joy, exactly what you said, the going out and looking for it, like just getting out of the house kind of thing, getting out of your mental house, getting out of your physical house to look for joy is something that really you can then draw it back in. So it's that law of circulation, of what goes around comes around. So
and then very importantly is expressing it. Finding a way to maybe even extend a compliment, even in the midst of not feeling so well, communicating in a lively way. It can be done. I even remember visiting sick people in hospitals sometimes, and I've seen people like, what do they have to be joyful for? But they're smiling and enjoying. I mean, I don't know how much joy, but clearly one can do that.
Right.
And when one does it on a regular basis, one actually starts to experience it on a regular basis.
Right.
It becomes a more permanent quality, not like happiness, which goes up and down. Joy is something that becomes part of who we are.
Part of the fiber of your life.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
The beingness of your life.
It's an energy.
Yeah.
It's a healing energy.
Yeah. What a profound journey, Jim. Really profound. And living with the Bully of Crohn's disease, I think it sounds to me, and experiencing you here in the studios, you're doing it in a very gracious and elegant way. So I just want to give you props for that.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So the book is called Living with the Bully of Crohn's Disease. It's written by James Patterson. Now, people can go to the website again, right?
Well, again, CCFA is where if they want to donate and learn more about Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. The book is available on Amazon in both a digital format as well as a book format if they want to pick it up. And again, the idea behind me is, in writing it, was hopefully there's some ideas in there that might be useful for people that are living with Crohn's or with any kind of chronic ailment.
I got to tell you, with me and my diabetes, reading it, I was like, oh yeah, that's good. I'm going to practice that. And I love that you've written it in the first person. So the questions that you ask and then you answer immediately, first person, mostly present tense, which made me, it was almost like you were within me talking with me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
absolutely.
I love the way that you wrote it. And the website is ccfa.org, and that's where you can find out more about Crohn's disease and make a donation. It is a nonprofit, so that the research can help more people like James, and just be inspired to give a little bit more in your life, however that is.
Absolutely. And I guess the last point is, as I look at it, and for anybody that's having any challenge in life, is that, and you use the word victim. We it's very easy, and I personally have experienced this as well, to go into sort of the victim mode and life is against me. But we do have options to do things. We do have options to be proactive. We do have options. We are not just who we are, period. We can deal with our anger, fear, and guilt. We can build joy, gratitude, and forgiveness into our life. We can do these things. We can become healthier people. And you look at it, I made the comment is, you can be the most healthy physical person in the world, but full of anger and frustration and whatever else. And I don't call that health.
No, I
True
agree.
health is balance of mental, emotional, and spiritual.
I agree with you. James Patterson, I just want to finish with a quote from your book. You said, Until I realize that I do not have to be a passive bystander to my own illness or other life situations, nothing will change. But once I recognize where I can take charge of my responses to life, I can open the door to therapeutic changes. Thank you so much, James Patterson. The book is Living with the Bully of Crohn's Disease. And we're just going to finish with, and so it is, namaste.